external versus internal. So what I'd like to do is kind of just get your interpretation of it as if you were talking to a group of volleyball coaches or youth coaches, if it's possible. Okay.
Okay. Well, the typical definition of an external focus is a focus on the movement effect on the environment. So typically that's an implement such as a ball that you're manipulating, hitting, throwing, kicking, whatever, as opposed to your foot or your hand that's doing the work, so to speak. And an internal focus is just that, focusing on body movements that you use to, balance or, when you tell, say, a tennis player to focus on the swing of their arm, or a golfer, that would create an internal focus. And
the external would be the club or
exactly,
the fairway,
yes,
or the out of bounds or whatever.
Exactly.
So for a volleyball player, it would be the court, the ball, the net.
Or a spot on the court, a target that you're aiming for.
Right, okay.
So if you just focus on that,
perfect.
That would be one.
Okay. You had done some research with volleyball. I read your book a few weeks ago. So can you go over that, what you did in that experiment?
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So what we first did was, I had a couple of students who were volleyball players, and they wanted to do a study. So I said, okay, why don't we do this? Why don't you find a textbook or a few textbooks and see, what volleyball coaches typically say to learners, the players. And so we tried to come up with some typical feedback statements. And I think the task we used in that study was a serve. We called it tennis serve.
Sure. Okay.
So we came up with 4 feedback statements that could be used in the study that were based on these textbooks. And after every 5th trial, I believe, the experimenter chose one feedback statement out of those 4. And that was the most appropriate for the given situation. So that was one group who received these internal focus feedback statements, which is what the textbooks suggested. So for the other group, we tried to translate these statements and make them more, external. We eliminated, I think, almost all of the body-related words. And also those feedback statements included images. I remember we said, I believe, something like, we used the image of a whip, using a whip for the serve, instead of, telling people to accelerate their shoulder first and then the elbow and wrist. So we use images, which is actually another good way to promote an external focus.
Yeah. I know in your book you used that a lot. You talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
The imagery part, yeah. And so there was a significant difference in
Oh yes, yes, and it became obvious pretty early on during practice, I believe. And when the participants came back a week later and received no more feedback, those with external focus feedback did much better. They did better, but they were more accurate.
Yeah. Okay. So in the broadest sense, internal makes us think about something, bring it into ourselves, and then execute it, versus an external, which is just think about it and execute it. So we're losing this part. Is that?
Well, that's a good question. I wouldn't say we're losing this part. Okay, so I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that when we talk about external focus or internal focus, we're talking about the planning of the movement we're about to do, right? So what do we concentrate on as we are about to execute a serve or whatever it is? That does not mean that you're not aware of your body movements.
Right.
And I think that's important to keep in mind, because some people have claimed, some researchers, but athletes need to be aware of what they're doing. And I said in a couple of papers, yes, of course, they are aware of what they're doing, even when they plan the movement in terms of the movement effect they want to achieve. That doesn't mean they're not aware of what they're doing. Right. They're very well aware of it, and they can analyze their own movement patterns typically.
Yeah.
And know what they did right or wrong, and then they can, find another external focus that might work better next time, you know.
So it's not necessarily that we're skipping a step. It's just we're, how would you describe it?
I would say we're not concerned about, you know, coordinating our body movement. We're not concerned about, you know, our selves, the self as it's often called, you know, in psychology. There's actually there are interesting things happening in the brain when we, you know, think about the self and our body movements in this case, and those activations in the brain tend to interfere with our movements.
And just slow them down a tick or slow them down a little bit.
Yeah, and make them more awkward. You have more co-contractions. You're less fluid, less efficient, less accurate in turn.
Okay. So I have to confess to you that I contacted a lot of coaches and said, hey, I'm meeting with Dr. Wulf, and do you have questions? And the same question came up from probably 3 or 4 different coaches. And it was a question that I was going to ask well. So I know either there's some misunderstanding about it or we just don't understand where you're going with this. Okay. When we're teaching athletes in the first phase, the learning phase, as coaches, you know, we're very conscious of the fact that we want to tell a kid, you know, go, you know, left, right when you swing a ball. You know, we want to make sure they understand left, right. Or when we're setting a ball, we want to always tell them to set off their right foot. So we tell them to go left, right. And the process of which that happens is again, I think old school, maybe that repetition, memorization, things like that, which we both know are not great, you know, not necessarily great. But how do we take those kids in the learning phase and use external versus internal, but still get them to do the proper movements? Does that make sense? Did that make sense? Okay.
Makes sense.
So that's the biggest struggle. A lot of people are like, well, how do you know, once you have a kid in the autonomous phase, it's easy to say, hey, contact the outside of the volleyball. That's easy. But if you have a kid that's never served before, how do you've got to teach them to toss the ball and to contact the ball and things like that. So how do you go back to imagery to do that, or do you have to get specific?
Well, you know.
Or maybe there's no answer to that. I don't know.
No, I mean, in general, I mean, I played volleyball, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not.
Did you play volleyball? Did you?
Well, when I studied sports science.
Oh, nice. Okay, very
back
cool.
In Cologne.
Yeah.
I'm a sports scientist by training.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I have some background and experience, but I'm not a volleyball coach, so I wouldn't be able to come up with, you know, really good statements, feedback, or instructions.
Yeah.
But I think that's really up to the creativity of the coach, you know, to somehow find images or words that convey to the child or the player, you know, what they should be doing without using, you know, body-related words. I know that's hard sometimes, but you know, I mean, demonstrations work really well.
Right.
Just showing them what to do, and then maybe giving them some hints. Again, externally worded, so to speak.
Right.
I don't think we need to tell them that much, especially children, but also adults. I mean, anybody learns really well by just trying to copy what they see, and then, you know.
So you're saying maybe just focus more on the visual, seeing what's going on visually.
Well, that's one way, if you don't want to use 1,000 words.
Yeah, and then just coming up with, I mean, we have to just think about it. We just have to figure out a way to do it. And the feeling is, and the research would say that they'll pick up skills faster and more efficiently, and by using external versus internal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't take all that much, you know.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, techniques, you know, in sports are often pretty complex, but sometimes just one little tip will elicit a whole, you know, a much better technique. I'm thinking, for example, of a golf study we did, you know, where we asked the players, it was done in Korea, in Seoul, Korea, where the instructor or the experimenter said to one group, just focus on, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, focus on pushing against the left side of the ground when you hit the ball.
Right, okay.
Remember,
I did.
seen
That was
the
in
study,
the book,
versus, you know, shift your weight to the left foot. So minor difference, but the whole technique changed pretty much instantaneously. And the ball went farther, and
and the accuracy was better.
And the actual technique was much better. Yeah,
Yeah.
much more efficient. And
what started you in this? What started you in the external versus internal, or what started it?
Pretty much all my life I've enjoyed practicing skills.
Yeah.
Sports skills, and this actually got started when I windsurfed. I think it was one of the first windsurfers in Germany back in the late 1970s. I started windsurfing, and anyway, I kept it up for a few decades. So about 20 years ago, I practiced a power jibe, and I bought a magazine and followed all the instructions and the pictures they had in this magazine that told you where to put your hands on the boom and where to put your feet and when to shift your weight and how and so forth. And I tried to do it the way I had read it, and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
I ended up in the water almost every time I tried it. And so anyway, and then I looked around and I saw all these, some really good people out there who just did it very smoothly. And I thought, they don't think about all these things that I try to think about.
Yeah.
They just do it. They just go around the corner, so to speak, or they just turn the board. And so I said, I'll just try that. I just won't think about any of the things I just read. I'll just try to turn the board, and it worked so much better.
Yeah, wow.
It really was very impressive, and I could hardly believe it.
Yeah. So that was your eye-opening moment. That said, there has to be something here. Yeah. And then were you, at the time, were you working for just yourself or like a sports federation or a certain sport said, hey, figure this out for us? Like, how can we make this better?
No, actually, I was a researcher. I was at a research institute in Munich, Max Planck Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, I was just doing it, for fun.
And then this just started.
And then I had a couple of students who wanted to do a study for a thesis, and so we tried to find a task. I had a ski simulator in the lab, and I just wanted to replicate this and see if these thoughts or foci, would make a difference for anybody, not just me. So.
Were you surprised when you started seeing the research? Were you surprised at how significant it was?
Oh, I was.
Really?
It blew my mind, even though, this is what I had kind of expected. That's why we did this study.
Yeah.
When I saw the data and, two-word difference in the instruction, which was focused on the wheels of the platform versus focus on your foot, the wheels, your foot, 2-word difference, had a huge impact on how well people did. And I remember I wasn't able to sleep that night because I was so excited about those results. Because I thought this could make such a difference, in people's lives and learning skills and so forth.
Is there a sport that is that has kind of embraced this in a big way? I mean, golf, you talk about golf a lot. Is golf one of those sports that seems to have embraced it in a?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's interesting because physical therapists and golfers were among the first to really get interested in this research.
Yeah.
And I think golfers, for an obvious reason, because golf is so hard. It's so hard to hit a golf ball well. And so they always struggle, with what to focus on. Their swing thoughts, as they call it.
Right. Yeah.
That's probably why.
Yeah. Is there any like from Germany, any of those teams that have like enlisted your help to work on training techniques or anything like that, or feedback loops with those athletes?
No, I mean sometimes give presentations I just remember I went to a Nike meeting. Yeah,
the Nike Spark. I saw that.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Talking with all these coaches there, and I've talked at golf conferences a couple of times and physical therapy conferences.
Yeah.
So
if you're a coach or beginning coach, and we give you this idea of external versus internal, is there kind of a formula or an idea of how we would take a phrase that we would use normally and make it external? Is there some sort of is there a formula to do that, or is it just you just have to kind of sit down and think about it? You saw some of the ones that John came up with in the article.
I really like them.
Yeah, they're good. Is there a formula that you use at all when you're talking to coaches about this, or? Well,
the formula would be to try to eliminate all body words.
Yeah, just get all the body words out.
It doesn't take much. You mention one finger or one hand, and it's enough to produce this internal focus and result in less effective performance. It's just one word. It's really yeah, I'm always reminded when I say that of a study in which we had people jump as high as possible. So we used, a Vertec instrument that has these rungs and a pole that you try to displace. And, when you just ask people to focus on the finger with which they're about to displace the rungs, so one word, finger, it results in lower jump height. It results in, lower forces that people produce, say, against the force platform, so-called, lower joint moments. And anyway, it changes the whole coordination pattern. Just this one word or focus on one finger elicits a whole different motion in the legs, in the whole body.
Yeah, and the focus though, as you were saying, hit the were you using finger as the focus, or you were saying hit the top of a vertex or whatever it would be?
Yeah, we actually had 3 conditions. One was the internal one, focus on the finger with which we were going to hit the rung. One was focus on the rungs. That was external. Right. And the other was a control condition where people were just asked to jump as high as possible.
And the rungs obviously was higher, significantly higher.
Exactly. Yeah. And internal and control conditions didn't differ as usual.
Yeah.
And
wow. It's interesting. I was intrigued a lot, especially in the book you talked about this, and then actually, I know you hate it, but in the golf podcast I enjoyed it too, where you talked about the distance part. There was basically as we got a little more into the autonomous phase, you would stress things farther away from the body, and so what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Reasoning. I mean, we discovered it.
Yeah.
I mean,
how did you discover that?
Well, we did a study. I forget when it was published. 2003, I believe, where we still use this balance platform, and we asked people to focus on keeping little stickers on the platform horizontal. And in that study, we simply put the stickers farther away from the feet. They used in the earlier studies, they were pretty close to the feet.
Okay.
Then we decided to put them farther away from the feet to see if that would make a difference.
Right.
So we thought maybe something that's farther away from the body people would be able to distinguish that even better from the body itself. And anyway, it turned out to be the case.
And then you followed that up with golf. Wasn't there a golf thing that you did as well?
Yes. That was a group in the UK who did that study where they asked people to focus on the ball trajectory and the target, the landing point of the ball, versus the club head or the wrist that was internal. So you have a proximal external focus, the club face, and then a more distal one, the ball trajectory, and that also was better than the proximal external focus or internal focus. And there are a few other studies that have shown the same effect.
So the way volleyball goes, you're 12, 13, 14, you're obviously in the learning phase, and then 15, 16s, and then 17s, 18s in theory in college, you're in the more of the autonomous phase. So at that point, we should be telling kids, hey, serve the left corner of the court, or something to that effect, or serve it 6 inches over the net, something like that. That the distance wise, I'm trying to figure out a way in volleyball to engage it.
Yeah, I think it might even work sooner.
Yeah.
A lot sooner.
Yeah. Instead of the autonomous phase, you were saying maybe early on start doing that. Yeah. And so again, the farther away from a body that the feedback got, the better the results were, and again, pretty significantly, right?
Yeah, and those were beginners. People that never stood on that balance platform before. So I mean, in some cases, it could be advantageous to find or to use a more distal focus later in the learning phase, but in some cases, depends on the skill, I guess, on the exact focus you were asking them to adopt. So it's hard to say. I wouldn't say, wait until they reach the autonomous phase.
Right. Start as soon as you can.
Start, yeah. If it doesn't work, then, have them focus, say, on the ball first and then on the target.
Yeah. And rein it back in.
It's an empirical question.
One of the coaches asked, by using this, sort of agree with a lot of Schmidt's motor learning program or motor learning ideas as well, as like specificity versus generality and varied versus constant, things like that. This doesn't change any of that, right? This is just kind of falls into line with most of those teachings and those thoughts, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't change that. No.
Is there anything that if you were a motor learning person that you would, as you're listening or starting to implement this, is there anything that you would have that you think you'd have to change as far as feedback goes? I mean,
that's a good question.
Yeah.
So feedback, yes. So it sounds as if you're familiar with that feedback literature, where the gist is essentially that people shouldn't get feedback very often.
Right.
So less
is more, 100%.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, less is better. And that was the reasoning behind that was that people become dependent on the feedback. If they get too much of it, they never learn how to interpret their own intrinsic feedback. And I question that.
Do you?
I do. I mean, I think it's the case when you have some, artificial laboratory tasks where people probably become dependent on it because they have nothing else to, concentrate on. But in real life, I think that's much less likely. And there are other reasons why less feedback is better.
Yeah.
And that is people don't feel criticized all the time.
Sure.
Or
right.
That's one. But also, I mean, we have shown in at least 2 studies that when the feedback is worded in an external way, so to speak, so, you give people feedback that directs their attention externally, more is actually better.
Okay. All right.
If it's worded in an internal way, then less is better.
Yeah. Is it still a small, like in other words, you're not rambling. It's literally like a small cue or a series of 5, 6, 8 words, whatever it might be. Boom, and you just keep giving to them more and more often, right? Yeah. But I think the issue that we have, I think a lot of times is coaches tend to overcoach, and it's not just volleyball; it's in every single sport, and they just want to talk and talk and talk, and I think that's when kids kind of zone out. Yeah. So you're saying that when you find that external, whatever that you're comfortable with, to keep reinforcing that and keep giving to them, right?
Yes,
keeping it simple, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it keeps people's mind, it keeps people's attention direct, externally. Because if you don't do it very frequently, then they tend to focus again on what they are doing. Yeah, because it seems to be almost the default.
Right.
Because previous coaching experiences, or because people tend to become a little self-conscious and they focus on what they're doing. But if you keep reinforcing, the external cues, so to speak, their attention, remains external. Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Has there ever been an environmental or behavioral study using this? Because again, a lot of our sport is teenage girls, and teenage girls are, as you know, notorious for being self-critical and having really struggle with esteem and things like that. Has there ever been studies that talks about how this actually helps that situation, or do you know of any studies like that, or have you done studies like that?
Actually, yes.
You have?
A long time ago.
Really?
Yeah, I had the similar thoughts, and it was a soccer study we did. In the UK, I believe, or was it in Germany? I can't remember right now. So soccer is a traditionally male, or was a traditionally male sport, especially in Europe. And so, girls might have to overcome these stereotype threats. And so I kind of assumed that they might be more self-conscious than boys, right? So I thought maybe, if you give them external focus instructions or feedback, they would benefit even more from this feedback relative to internal instruction, relative to boys, and they did.
Really?
Yeah.
And again, was it significant, or was it?
It was significant, yes.
Wow. Okay.
So I think there was a significant interaction between gender and the effectiveness of the benefits of the external focus.
How many years ago was this?
That was a long time ago. It was kind of published in an obscure journal, and probably in the early 2000s, so about 15
years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. It may, I don't, again, but it may be something to talk about again, because this generation, as we go through, especially the last 10, 12 years, this generation of young women, especially in athletics, is continually looks inside, and and it's really difficult to, as a coach. So that's something that's a huge benefit for us, that if that aids that, oh my gosh, that's gigantic. So that could be a game changer.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that. Nobody else has ever mentioned this issue.
Really?
Yeah, and I was never really kind of proud of this study, because I recently saw the title again and I really don't like it.
Really?
I think it was something like, does an external focus, benefit females or something. So the title is really awful.
Yeah. Wow.
But
I'm gonna look it up now, because that could be huge. But maybe it's worth looking at again, because it's an issue that we constantly have. So
that's a good point, I think. I can certainly send you the paper.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. What is it that you're not comfortable with? Is there something that, as you talk about this to coaches and stuff, that you want to study more, or you haven't actually nailed down? Is there a fringe element of this that you're just like, I got to figure this out a little bit more or something? Or are you really comfortable with the way this is progressing?
I'm absolutely comfortable.
You are?
With it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
mean, the research, like I said, read the book and I've read a lot of the papers, and the research is, it's pretty knock down, drag out.
Yeah.
Good. it's,
I know.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, in 2013, this review article was published, and I looked at all the studies out there, and I couldn't find a single study that showed the opposite.
Really?
I've never seen a situation where an internal focus is better than an external one.
Right.
So it's so reliable. There are a few studies out there that were not very well done, where people confounded different things, or the instructions weren't really clear. They said they were, internal, but they weren't. And so there are some, studies that aren't great.
Yeah.
Where the authors claim, but this might be an exception.
There's a podcast, and I can't remember the name of it, but a guy named Rob Gray down at ASU does this podcast about a lot of this kind of stuff, motor learning and things like that. And I actually was one of the guys I texted and said, "Hey, do you have a question for Gabriele?" And he said, I think her research is good and all this kind of stuff on internal and external, but he said, make sure you talk to her about what she's doing now. So, optimal training. I want to hear all about this. My
colleague Rebecca Luthwaite and I worked on a new motor learning theory over the past few years, and we call it the optimal theory of motor learning. Well, first of all, it's called optimal. It's just an acronym. It stands for optimizing performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning.
Okay.
So we're looking for certain letters. Like L for learning, and P for performance, and attention. So A, and anyway, eventually I came up with optimal.
That's great. Okay.
And it was a challenging task. But anyway, an external focus is a critical or a key feature of this theory as well. And there are two other ones.
Okay.
And that is enhancing performance expectancies. And the third one is autonomy support. So all these three are, I think, absolutely necessary for optimal learning.
Right. Okay. So internal versus external, I think we understand. Talk to me about basically raising expectations. Is that from a coaching level, or is that it is? So explain that one to me. Talk about that.
Okay. So we call it enhanced expectancies, and there are many, many findings that show that if we essentially make the learner feel more competent, if we increase their confidence levels, their self-efficacy is probably the best word, they do much better. And there are various ways in which you can do that. But one is giving them, positive feedback, meaning you highlight the things that they do well, not just tell them what they are still doing incorrectly and how to change their movement, but point out the good things. That's important. There are other ways of enhancing expectancies, such as, making clear that, they can learn the skill. It's, pointing out the changeability of the skill with practice. Sometimes people think, I'm not good at this, I'll never be good at this, and just highlighting the fact that it's just a learning the manner of learning and practicing.
And would that be where a growth versus a fixed mindset might come in, direct stuff, or a little bit? Okay.
Conception of ability.
Okay,
Exactly.
gotcha. Okay.
And there are other really interesting things that you can do, and that is you can even use optical illusions to make a target look bigger.
Really?
It sounds funny, right? But we did it in a golf study. We put large circles around the golf hole, so the target, the hole, looked smaller.
Right.
And in another situation, we put small circles around the hole, so the hole looked bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And people who practiced with a bigger looking hole were more accurate than people who practiced with a smaller looking hole.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and even the next day when they all came back and the surrounding circles had been removed, so there was just a hole.
Yeah.
The ones who had practiced with a bigger looking hole still did better.
Wow.
It's weird,
really?
right?
That is weird, yeah.
So, but they thought, they could they were more confident that they could hit the bigger looking hole.
Yeah.
And they did, and then even the next day they did better. So it influenced learning.
Huh.
So that's another example.
Yeah. All right, and then the third part of it was?
Autonomy support.
Okay.
Which means, giving learners choices is absolutely important.
Okay.
So not just telling them what to do and how to do it and prescribing all the practice conditions, but giving learners certain choices. And it doesn't really matter what those choices are, interestingly. It will always enhance learning.
Are we talking about in practicing competition, or are you talking about like out of the sporting world, or a little both?
It doesn't even matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and in life in general, the way you treat people. I mean, if you give people choices or ask them questions as opposed to telling them to do this, makes a big difference.
They become more engaged, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
more engaged.
Yeah.
They feel more respected. Their performance is enhanced.
Yeah.
Their motivation is increased. They feel much better. They're much happier, and they do much better in general. And this is also the case for sports skill learning.
Right.
So, for example, letting them decide when they want to be given feedback, or even how many practice trials they want to do, how long they want to practice, has a huge impact on how well people do.
Yeah.
And
every coach that would hear this would just be going crazy right now by saying, "Oh, I go to this practice, that practice."
Yeah,
but
it's so powerful, though,
yeah.
And the interesting thing is, even if you give them choices that are unrelated to the task they're learning,
right,
even that makes a difference.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. In one study where people were asked to learn a balance task, when they came into the lab, we had two pictures on the desk, and the experimenter said, we're trying to decide which of these two pictures we should put on the lab wall. What do you think?
Really?
And
so that had nothing to do with the test they were about to do, something totally different.
Nothing to do, exactly. And they did better on this balance task. They learned the balance task better than people who were just told, by the way, we're going to put this picture on the wall, as opposed to that one.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing, huh? So, but it totally makes sense. I mean, it's just human nature. You like to have choices and not be told what to do. I don't think anybody's, when you're that command style coach and you do this, I think you get a certain level of athlete, but it's tough for them to grow. And again, talk about growth mindsets and things like that. So, wow.
It also, enhances people's self-efficacy. They feel respected. They feel like they're being treated like a human being. Their opinion matters.
Yeah.
And it kind of, they feel more confident, and that impacts their learning.
So those three areas that we just talked about, that's the optimal learning. And so if coaches were to embrace that in their gym culture or team culture or whatever, that would, in your theory of the paper would basically be that you would see it enhanced an athlete. The athletes would get better, faster, more retention in what they learn. Wow.
They would be more motivated, more interested, and we would have more success experience, which in turn, would probably keep them motivated and so forth. So
wow, that's a pretty powerful
virtuous cycle
thing. Yeah. That's a really powerful thing. Holy cow. If you had to walk into any practice, any sport, any gym, whatever, and you had to give a coach 3 things that they needed to do based on your research, all your research and stuff, in order to get more from their athletes.
Well, those would be the 3 things.
Those 3 things right there.
Absolutely, yeah. Those seem to be the critical things, give people positive feedback. That seems to be so important. Do anything you can to enhance their self-efficacy or confidence. That's, I think, really critical for anything we do, really, including performing sports skills. We all know this. Everybody who's active in sports knows how important confidence is. And you can do that by, enhancing expectancies. And again, give people choices. Any choice, really, will do the trick. And keep their mind off of, the self, the body, and just direct it to what the person is trying to achieve, the intended outcome of the movement. And if you, do these 3 things, you'll see a big improvement compared to what people do in real life, where they, again, find out the negative things that still need to be fixed and then tell people what to do and direct their attention internally.
I almost think that would work for a corporation as well, wouldn't it? For the most part, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it could work in any sort of a,
Absolutely, yes. Now, the external focus is probably more motor performance related than the 2 other things.
What are you working on next? Do you
I'm still working on studies related to all these 3 things with colleagues. For example, I'm working with a doctoral student in Australia who is also a kickboxing coach.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He's been working, among other athletes, with a world champion kickboxer, and he gave him a choice in terms of the order of different punches. So they have a test that involves a certain order of 4 different punches that they do. They punch what do you call them? Punching bag, I guess.
Bag, yeah.
Then they can measure the forces and the speed of the punch. And so that's a standard test. Now, they do that every training session, pretty much. And what he did was, each day he did the standard test, but also he gave the athlete a choice in terms of the order of punches. So the athlete could decide in which order he wanted to do the punches. And guess what? The impact forces were greater.
Because of that one little thing.
Because of the choice of the punches, exactly.
That's incredible.
That was incredible. He did it over 6 days, and it was very consistent. Whenever the athlete had a choice, the punches were harder.
Yeah. Is that surprising for you as well?
I mean, somewhat.
Just that little bit of autonomy makes that big a difference.
The study, and we thought this might work, but seeing it work is actually pretty amazing.
Wow.
And he just repeated the study with 12 other, boxers, not world champions, obviously.
Right.
They showed the same thing, very consistent. Whenever you give them a choice, they punch harder.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. This is a game changer. This is going to change the way we talk to our kids, the way we train, and then this, because it's a lot of what we already teach, especially the positive feedback versus the negative, and stuff like that. But this was great. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, this is great.